What's going on, you loyal listeners? Thank you for tuning in to the L Squared podcast. I'm your host here, Luke Larson, and joining me today, as per the unusual, my lovely and loquacious special guest will be assisting me in leisurely launching you into levity, writer and director of the new film Motorway Macabre, showing at the South Dakota Film Festival right now, Matt Eckholm.
Thank you.
I made it through the whole intro and did have to mess up on your name.
You know, I'm used to it. It's two syllables. It to me it looks very obvious, but it seems to be a challenge sometimes, so I don't hold it against anybody.
Yeah, let's look into shortening that before the episode's up here. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Matt. I saw your film and I just fell in love with it, man. It's just so unique and cool. And you know, we'll get more into it, but just so the loyal listeners know, I'll go over the synopsis for us here. I always love a good synopsis. It's an art in and of itself, you know, because there's times where you're like, I wonder what the synopsis for that is, and you're like, that's really good. So for Motorway Macabre, above an abandoned raceway in the desert, two local goths watch as a hotshot driver challenges a pack of phantom racers. Love it. So good.
You know, the thing with like Loglines and stuff like that is I have a friend where we were developing something and his logline was like solid. It was like 5 words flat. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, it's so easy talking about this project I'm working on with you because all I have to say is that, and people get it instantly. It's like, yeah, I can never describe your films to anybody. I can never like sum them up and I'm like, yeah, I can't either. I have a hard time writing loglines.
I'd rather be that way anyway. It's more fun, it seems like. But you know what I was telling you earlier is just that this film has such a unique, like, an apparent atmosphere and feeling from the moment you get into it. You know, I wrote down it's like wacky races or speed racer after dark, you know.
Yep. Basically, before we knew it was going to be Motorway Macabre, before we even really knew what the plot was, I just had a phrase that I just kept repeating because I thought it was funny to myself. I just kept saying German expressionist speed racer. And so like, I think it was around like early, like April in 2018, a group of us were just like saying that over and over and just like, yeah, that's going to be my next project is German expressionist speed racer. And like, as I kept saying it, is like, well, I guess that's what we're going to be doing. Because I think at the time I had been wanting, there was a story that I really liked that just lapsed into the public domain. And I was like, cool, I can finally make that. I've wanted to make it my whole life. And I started to develop that, but it was a very special effects heavy project. And I'd only done one kind of special effects sort of movie before. And I was like, maybe I should do something small in between so that I can kind of, you know, just get my feet wet a little more before I jump into something that's like trying to do green screens and people and like all sorts of CGI environments, and maybe see how that goes. And then, 3 years later, and I still haven't made that first thing. This one took 2 years. And I was like, so, just those little projects that kind of snowball and get out of hand.
Well, especially when there's a lot of stop motion animation, and that just takes forever, doesn't it?
It does. That was one of the first meetings I had. It was me, producer, like cinematographer, Christian Calabrese, and our stop motion sort of animation supervisor, Carrie Jo. Originally, I was thinking that the characters were going to be more like the death in Metropolis, where it's like person wearing a death mask and like with a flute kind of stepping out in the German expressionist sort of environment. And originally that was my take I was going to take with it. But then we kind of looked at what it would cost to make the masks, and the masks would have been like pretty expensive to do really well. And so Carrie Jo is a huge proponent to do stop motion at any time. And I had kind of wanted, I kind of got my start doing Lego movies. So I really it was a nice Pied Piper sort of call for me to be like, oh, well, she wants to do stop motion, so I guess we should. And that really, that tacks an extra year on the production. Originally, it was just going to be the cars. Like we were just going to do stop motion for the cars. And then when we added the figures, that ramped up the amount of stop motion, but significantly.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you did. I'm sure with all the Yeah, I was thinking about that with the expressions they make, and like when the faces turn and the mouth moves, and I just thought,
Yep.
man, that's a
Well,
lot.
and the thing too with that is, and Carrie Jo, like, to her, like, she's an amazing sculptor. She does all these really great, like, she just was, I can't actually talk about that, but she's always doing cool stuff, I should say, always doing cool stuff. And yeah, we kind of ran same sort of thing on a smaller scale. We ran into where with the mask cost, we were like, okay, well, making 4 puppets also would be very expensive. So she was clever enough to figure out a way where we could basically do 4 characters with 1 puppet. And
Wow.
we basically would shoot one whole character. She would resculpt it, and we'd make changes to the costume. And so basically from death down to famine, like, we kind of devolved that character to keep that 1 puppet in service throughout the entire movie. And anybody who knows anything about stop motion puppets and how fragile they are and how difficult it is to kind of keep 1 puppet going for multiple scenes, let alone an entire film, would, recognize the amount of craft that went into making that possible. And yeah, she basically is like there's like 3 things about this movie that I think are really crucial to it having succeeded. Carrie Jo Skoquist, the Poor Nobodies, and Christian Calabrese's sound design. Those are the 3 things that make this movie work. If without those, we wouldn't have a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had that written down too. The pulsing score is so good. It just really draws you in and is like, oh yeah, here we go. This is good. You can like feel the fog roll in, and you're like, I'm ready for this.
The Poor Nobodies are fantastic. They that was another Carrie Jo addition to the project. Actually, she said from day one, she's like, I want to get these people to do the score. And I think when she played a couple tracks, we were like, yeah, of course they're going to. And what's really cool is it was all recorded in it was mostly all recorded in 1 session. We were actually there recording it. We've got some behind the scenes footage that we intend to release, like, as a little behind the scenes documentary at some point. Excuse me. But yeah, they kind of tracked it almost all in 1 go, and then kind of just layered on some extra sounds to it. It's fascinating to watch them work. It was such it's a weird environment to be in. Like, I mean, like, filmmakers of a certain level where we're used to kind of doing, like, scrappy projects and things, like, a lot of times the score doesn't actually mean a score. And in this case, we were like in a room while composers were playing the music, and it was an unreal experience.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It really just, like you said, like, I think when I was watching dailies of the stop motion, I think I was getting a little nervous, because until the score and the sound effects came in and really made it real, I think, like, I was worried. But that really, they're super important to the piece.
Yeah, it is. It gives you that, like, the visceral feeling of it. The visuals are incredible too. That darkness and the kind of purples and blues that come in, but then, like, it kind of gives it that heartbeat. And then the stop motion figures, I said, it feels like, just gives it like this tactile, nature to it, and all just comes together. And I loved it. I mean, I've watched it 4 or 5 times. I love it. Wow. It's so much fun. And I wrote down, like, when you said, you're kind of throwing your hat over the wall, saying for years you want to do the German expressionist speed racer. What made you think you wanted to do that?
I don't know. I think what draws me to it is, like, I think I came out of film school feeling very disappointed that I didn't, like, do as much stuff that was really true to, like, my sort of, like, weird sort of interests. I kind of was like, I'm going to make normal movies because that's what everybody here is doing, and I want to just, like, I want to do something that gets into the juried screening, and, like, and I think as time went on, I was like, I'm running out of, like, it gets harder and harder to make stuff as you get older, and people are like, people have other responsibilities. It gets more expensive to kind of bring people together. And I think this was like, I got to do this and find out if I can do it now. And I think part of it too, just is like one of the movies that I always keep going back to is the 2008 Speed Racer movie, just because it is, I don't think the critics really understood it when it came out, that it is a pitch perfect adaptation of that cartoon, and it is so unabashedly live action anime. And I think that just like that was the sort of visual interpretation of, man, I wish more movies kind of played with the fact that not everything needs to be realistic and not everything needs to be like, the one thing that I kind of drew and I came to with like sort of the way we shot some of the live action stuff is I said, we're doing this, the Barry Sonnenfeld sort of philosophy, where Barry Sonnenfeld, I mean, now he's a director, like did the Series of Unfortunate Events, did Men in Black. But when he was a cinematographer and doing some of the early Coen Brothers films, he was more about lighting is about feeling. It's not about physics. And it's like, I can put a light here and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like, it doesn't mean as much to me that I know what the source of the light is, as long as the effect is what I want. And you see that in his first directorial film, The Addams Family, where Morticia Addams always has an eye light, no matter whether it's motivated or not. And so that was one thing that I put into this, is I was like, I want that Morticia Addams eye light. Like, I don't care. I don't know where it's coming from, and I don't care. And so it's kind of funny where I'll look at the Coen Brothers movies that Roger Deakins shot, who has the exact opposite philosophy of, I want to be able to walk a camera around a room and not have to relight. And the Sonnenfeld philosophy, which is lighting is a tool, and an emotional tool, I should say. It's a tool in both cases. But I think that, I'm glad you said you like tangents, because this is a tangent that I've fallen down.
Yeah, keep going.
This is the sort of, these are all the sorts of things that kind of collected in my brain over time and sort of ended up in this project. And I think it was around that time I probably rewatched the Speed Racer movie. Z-Fest in the Twin Cities was going on. I think we were talking about how we wanted to do something that was like very visually striking. And I think I was listening to Ghost Riders in the Sky by Johnny Cash a lot on my iPod at the time. And I was like, okay, cool. I think all these ideas are coming into something right now. So that's where the term German expressionist speed racer started getting used. And that, I think a couple months after that, I had a script and we were rolling. So
that's great. I love how that all just kind of naturally bubbled up. Like, well, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And yeah, another one that made me think of was Edgar Wright's Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Very much like one that critics didn't necessarily love at the time either, but was just such a visual chance of like, we're making a comic book, literally and live action together, and really stretch, the effects that we can do. And it brings me into it more,
Oh yeah.
Sure,
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see more stuff like that. I think it's too bad though the Wachowskis have kind of drifted away from that. Like, I mean, The Matrix was literally like it was the first anime live action movie, even though it it was its own thing. It wasn't an adaptation of anything, but it really was the first mainline blockbuster movie that really took those sort of action tropes from anime like Akira or Ghost in the Shell and put it into cinema language. And then they did it with Speed Racer. They did some of it with V for Vendetta, but like they kind of drifted from that. And I would love for them to return to their roots on that. I'm pretty sure they're not involved in the new Matrix, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think
I've only seen the first one.
I'm pretty sure one of the two siblings is.
Okay.
But I don't think they both are.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah. And it just adds another element that I like that that's sort of, you leaned into like, well, guys, it's not realistic that 4 skeletons are going to be racing around on the track. So I mean, why go realistic with where this light is coming from?
And I kind of had a practical thing too, because I think sometimes I would get in the weeds of like, because the slot cars that I got, it was from somebody who specifically manufactured like these like most slot cars that are sort of like, off the shelf, they're of either like the stock car variety or something like a modern race at Formula One. And this guy was a specialty like modeler who was like, he was doing molds and stuff. I think he lives in England now. He lived in France at the time. And I was like really hung up on, okay, I want these specific models, and I want like I want the costumes to have these sort of period looks. And I was doing all this research into like that sort of thing. And Carrie Jo kept going like, it's gonna go by in like a couple seconds. Nobody's gonna know what car it was. And I think that was a really good grounding sort of like realism moment of like it literally doesn't matter like which weird like pre-war like car manufacturer was involved with this or whether they were wearing the right costumes, because you won't see them that much. It just has to get the effect across. And I think that was a good standard. Will we see this on screen? Will it matter? I think that was helpful.
She maybe saved you another year
of
stop motion.
really.
That would have taken, yeah. And I wrote down too that I loved how the commentary from the two teenage goths was great, and just the world building there of like the one who is bringing, I didn't write their names down. One of them is Willow. What's the other one?
Phaedra is the other one.
Phaedra. So Phaedra's been there before, so she's showing Willow. So it automatically makes me think of like, okay, what was Phaedra's experience finding this place? And was she up there sometime? And then you're kind of with Willow, like, what is going on? And the moment when they sit down to eat and Willow's like, don't you want to see who wins? It doesn't matter. Like, it drew me in. I'm like, I want to be there.
Well, it's and I listed off a bunch of things that were in my brain that brought this together, but really like that whole experience of seeing something from that perspective. I, for 3 summers, was a camera operator at a harness racing track. It wasn't for cars. I was filming horses and stuff, but it was this weird sort of like experience where I'm free climbing up a tower that does not feel like it's structurally sound. I'm doing this in all sorts of weather. And then for 4 hours, I'm basically doing work for a grand total of maybe 2 minutes at a time, and then sitting and waiting for the next 2 minutes. And there was a lot of time that I just spent up there just kind of like bored, or like, I don't think I had a smartphone at this time. So like, I wasn't like surfing the internet or doing or like getting anything productive done. It was just like, okay, what can I see from this angle? And so I think at some point I was eventually going to turn those experiences into a film. And I think that's kind of where their experience of like, wow, they actually got to see something interesting while they were up there. Lucky them, that's where it came to for me.
Yeah, I hear you. When I had a couple injuries in high school when I played football, and so there were times where I'd be the equipment manager or whatever while I was hurt, and so one of those included filming for tape or whatever. And some stadiums that didn't have a nice box, literally a couple places was just like a scissor lift, and you would just go up to the top and the wind's blowing and you're sure enough going back and forth. And
mine didn't rock, but I did destroy a phone like when I was climbing down during a thunderstorm, and it fell out of my pocket and dropped 60 feet onto concrete. So it was like, well, better that than me, but
like, well, at least
kind of was a perspective moment. And I think the next year I was the most senior one, so I got to be in the main building at that point. So I was like, cool, I don't ever have to climb that again.
You're like, get up there, rookie. The other one, I had to do it in crutches one time. I did try and bring my crutches up there. Somehow I didn't, get hurt, but that's really a miracle.
It's those things that we accomplish in the moment, and then in hindsight go, why was I doing that?
Yeah, like who
let me do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Where was OSHA?
Yeah, exactly. What, weren't there adults around, or shouldn't I have said something? Everybody's just like, just go with it. Was there any meaning behind the meal of popcorn and pears?
The meaning behind the pears is peaches were out of season. Like literally, and it was I was kicking myself too, because our actress, we flew her in from Georgia. And it was like, well, if I knew that my producer wasn't going to be able to find these at the grocery store, I would have told her to bring some.
Man,
but there wasn't really too much meaning behind it. I mean, I know that's a terrible thing to say as a filmmaker, but I think really the popcorn was almost it's there as a visual gag, and I think it was it was more just supposed to be like just simple.
I was just digging into it because I was like, popcorn, pears, alliteration. There's more. I mean,
One of the things I was told in film school was that, like, if somebody asks you a question like that, you're always supposed to say yes, and you're just supposed to BS an answer. And I think that that's intellectually dishonest. I think that things can exist without having reason. I think that if somebody wants to divine a reason out of why there were pears in popcorn, and they say, this is what it means to me, I am a firm believer of death of the author. It's out in the world now. If you want to draw a meaning from it, go right ahead. But as far as me, I was ending the movie.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, that's like the whole. Have you seen the documentary Room 237?
Yes.
All about the conspiracy theories of The Shining, and the lighting coming from wherever the impossible window is like a big.
Yeah, it's tough because I think there was like one or two interesting theories in there, and then they didn't want to make a YouTube video, so they padded it out with some stuff that made absolutely no sense.
Right. That's like what was so fascinating to me was like all these people that have devoted their time, their lives, and so much energy into like the stuff that is like there's no way any one person could have like fit all that into one thing,
Well, it's like all the theories about like what does Hotel California mean? What are all the verses in American Pie supposed to mean? And it's like, yeah, there's probably an answer, and like at one point somebody knew what that was, but at a certain point it's like, what does it mean to you?
Right.
Like that's all that really matters. It's like there isn't like knowing the right answer, like unless it's like knowing the right answer can win you a bar tab at trivia. There's no like, achievement unlocked from knowing the exact true answer of who the king was or the jester in American Pie. It doesn't matter.
Right. Well, if it's any consolation, it meant something to me and your film.
Well, I'm glad. I'm very glad it did.
And maybe it's deeper than we give it credit for, but loyal listeners, go check out Motorway Macabre showing at the South Dakota Film Festival through the 25th. Go to southdakotafilmfest.org. And Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show. Was there anything you wanted to plug before we get out of here?
I don't have anything. I mean, you plugged the South Dakota Film Festival, which is great because South Dakota, I have to say, is one of my favorite film festivals that I've been going to since I think the first one I went to was in probably 2010. And I'm really excited to get back there when it's safe too, and when they're in person. Right now that's the only thing. And hopefully I'll have some new stuff to plug coming soon.
Where can we find you to keep up with your films?
I have a website that I'm terrible about updating. That's matteckholm.com. It has my socials on it, but the place that I tend to post the most is matt.eckholm, and on Instagram. That's the social media that makes me hate the world the least. So that's where I spend most of my time.
Well, great. Well, I love to hear it. I look forward to following your work and hopefully, I'm excited to see what your next big idea is, now that you got your German expressionistic speed racer out of the way.
We'll see. I think when I was talking to Diane for my Q&A at the film festival, we're talking about how nobody makes surf movies anymore. So who knows?
Well, if I had funding for it, I would give it to you right now, if that means
appreciate it.
Loyal listeners, as always, you can find me on Twitter at LukeLarson89. Find this podcast at L Squared Podcast on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook at L2 Podcast. We're on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out. Let us know what you thought about Motorway Macabre. Again, southdakotafilmfest.org. Matt, thank you again for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
Till next time.